Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 86 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending January 26, 2018, the Headin to Minneapolis edition. In this episode, Jay Rosen and I take a look at some of the week's top compliance-related stories. They include the government indictment of 5 KPMG partners and 1 former PCAOB professional for tipping off the firm of upcoming reviews of KPMG audits. We look at Mike Volkov, who suggested that CCOs need to review their corporate vows to corporations. We take a look at a piece by Dick Cassin on code of conduct, a review by Sam Rubenfeld of how Accenture uses bots to bring its code of conduct to employees. We pair that with an incredibly interesting article by Vince Walden in Fraud Magazine about preventing fraud and enhancing compliance program by using digital twins, AI, technology, all wrapped around innovation. We ask the question of, is your compliance team a part of your pre-acquisition M&A team? As Henry Cutter reported this issue, or at least explored it, in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Report. We highlight Eric Newcomer and Brad Stone's terrifying story about the fall of Travis Kalanick at Uber, as they reported in Bloomberg. We note Jonathan Marks knocks it out of the park again with a piece on his blog, Board and Fraud blog, entitled Board of Directors Guide to FCPA Compliance. It's a really fun week. We're pretty passionate about a lot of these topics, so we take a deep dive and get into it. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back for another episode of This Week in FCPA. This is episode 86 for the week ending January 26, 2018, the Headed to Minneapolis edition. As always, I'm joined by my cohort and co-host, Mr. Monitors, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Hey, Tom. What are we going to do with a week without real football?
I don't know. My wife asked me that. She says, does that mean that I will see you this weekend? And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe we can start our Oscar research, I was thinking.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We should start looking into that. So another big week of ethics and compliance in FCPA. What do you want to start us out with?
Well, let's start with the biggest, noting that we're going to circle back to this because the more I read, the more I listen, and the more I think about this, Jay, this is the kind of case that not only boggles the mind, but frankly, if you wrote a book about this, people would say, you can't write that in the fiction column or in the fiction section because fiction has to make sense. And it is the indictment of 5 former KPMG partners and 1 former public company accounting oversight board professional for the theft of confidential information about audit reviews by the PCAOB of KPMG and the use by KPMG of that information to prepare for audits, then to actually change audits, change work papers, and try to clean up the messes that they created in audits. Lots of folks have written and talked about this. Matt Kelly talked about it early on. Probably the most in-depth reporting I've seen is, unsurprisingly, Francine McKenna at Market Watch. Matt and I did a podcast on it. Tammy Whitehouse over at Compliance Week has written about it. I wrote about it. But I will have to say that if there was one person born to write this story, and I told her this, it was Francine McKenna. So I'm sure she'll be all over it, as is Tammy Whitehouse. The basic facts are, Jay, that there were 3 employees at the Public Accounting Oversight Board, David Sweet, Cynthia Holder, and 1 other. And Sweet and Holder were hired by KPMG with the express condition that they bring this confidential information over to KPMG. Now, the third PCAOB employee was a fellow named, I believe, David Wada. And David had the information, but and gave it to KPMG, but they did not hire him, or Jeffrey Wada, rather. So he was not hired, but he was one of the three that gave the confidential information. The people who received this, and this is just the truth is stranger than fiction part, Jay, is there were three national managing partners at KPMG who received the information, or we should say alleged to have. Those were David Middendorf, then national managing partner for audit quality and professional practice, Thomas Whittle, then national partner in charge for inspections, and David Britt, KPMG's head of KPMG's banking and capital market group. Not only did they use these to prepare for the audits and to change the work papers, but it turns out that basically Middendorf and the others extorted the two employees who came over from the PCAOB to keep bringing the confidential information over on KPMG's or the PCAOB's audits of KPMG, threatening them. And at one point, Middendorf told Sweet, remember where your paycheck came from. So lots going on here. Corporate culture, management, fraud, theft of confidential information. We're going to perhaps unpack it a little bit, but if I sound aghast at this, it's the more, like I said, the more I think about it, the more I am. So I'm sure you're got some thoughts on this as well, but I'm going to really ask you to hold off because otherwise we'll do the whole 30 minutes on this. And we do have a few other things that we wanted to talk about. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about was a very interesting article that our colleague Mike Volkov wrote entitled CCOs Need to Renew Corporate Vows, or Corporations Need to Renew Their Vows to Chief Compliance Officers. What did Mike share with us?
Mike decided to take a real nice look at the relationship that's in the past has existed between the chief compliance officer and the C-suite. And one of the things that you like to talk about, and I've spoken about it before in some of my writings, is how do you make ethics and compliance become a bottom line contributor? And how do you separate it from being just a cost center into something that's going to not only add to the bottom line, but something that you can incorporate into the day-to-day business? So Mike thinks that this is a great time for the CCO to kind of renew its vows with the company. And specifically within that is trying to figure out and incentivize the folks within the C-suite to the necessary nature of ethics and compliance. And in the past, it's always been looked at as something that happens when you get in trouble. But I think one of the themes that we're starting to hear very early in this year is how the proactive nature of ethics and compliance can lead to better profitability. We've had studies that look at that. And even in the things we're going to talk about today, we have some unique ways to use ethics and compliance and to make them being a competitive advantage for your business. So great thought piece from Mike, and it's going to be included in the show notes as always.
Jay, next up we had an article by Dick Cassin, and I will have to tell you that when Dick writes from the heart, I find it to be the most empowered and powerful writing he does. And he took a concept that you might not think of as really one from the heart, but it's code of conduct. Most people think of that as a lawyer written by lawyers for lawyers, thou shalt not kind of document. But he really takes it a little bit different direction and acknowledging that there are rules to be followed, that the code of conduct is really a statement by a company's top management about what the company truly believes. And that if you take that a step further as an employee, that's what you believe, and that's how your company believes, and everyone is expecting in the company to behave. And so Dick uses that really as a starting point to ask, is that something that we are measuring up to as employees? Are we measuring up to that as humans? Is there accountability? Are we acting honorably, or are we following falling short and using the standard of your company's code of conduct. And I really found it a very powerful way to think of something that, frankly, Jay, I'm not sure a lot of people put stock in. But if you kind of take Dick's approach, it becomes much more than just a paper list of thou shalt nots, but really, as he said, what we believe in, what top management believes in, and therefore what the company believes in.
So I made some notes on the article he wrote, and I go from what the company truly believes to what the company stands for to being a promise of how they'll act, and then syncing up with my last piece that we just spoke about. Pfizer's code of conduct says, our commitment to doing the right thing, which means complying with both the spirit and the letter of the laws that govern our industry, gives us a competitive advantage. Acting with integrity depends on each of us giving our full commitment. The responsibility lies with all of us. It's mine, it's yours, it's ours. So once again, Dick is articulating that idea of not only because it's the right thing to do, but if you're going to act that way, it will give you an advantage versus your competition.
Next up is an article by Sam Rubenfeld. And perhaps we should have paired this with one we're going to talk about a little bit later around technology and compliance, or innovation and compliance. But Sam looked at a report, or reported rather, on how Accenture uses bots to bring its code of conduct to employees. And the really interesting thing about this was I thought the technology angle, but how the bots act as an algorithm to direct the right topics to employees in the right circumstances. And we're going to take a much more sophisticated look at something along those lines a little bit later. But great piece by Sam, as always. And it really got me thinking about the next one we're going to talk about, and how technology is really leading to really a great amount of innovation sort of going forward. Our friend Jonathan Marks continues his, frankly, Jay, stunning run of in his first 5 posts, he's hit 5 out of the park. And other than your Patriots, I'm not sure anybody else bats at this high level on their blog posts. But Jonathan has a post entitled Board of Directors Guide to FCPA Compliance, and he really puts together an action plan from the board perspective on FCPA compliance. And if you want to know how to advise your board, or you you're on a board, need to think through it, I would heartily recommend this article to you. Of course, we'll link to it in the show notes, but kudos to Jonathan once again for knocking it out of the park.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And again, we're talking about what the responsibility is for the board of directors, and not only the composition of who should be on there. That's something that companies should think about now. Should there be somebody who's in there that knows things about cybersecurity, and people have a greater understanding of the ethics and compliance, but really how to infuse this throughout the corporation, and even talking about the correct reporting structure. So it's a great piece, and as you said, we'll link to it in the show notes. Next thing that we're going to talk about is an article from the Risk Compliance Journal, and it's written by Henry Cutter. And it's about a new survey and white paper that came out for Baker & McKenzie, and it's talking about how often companies use the compliance function when contemplating a merger or acquisition. And some of the just mind-boggling stats are fewer than 1 in 5 companies give compliance staff substantive roles in handling major mergers. So that's less than 20%, and then less than 50% have unresolved compliance issues when they do acquisitions. And, when I think about situations like this, I think about GE purchasing Alstom and really getting in there and looking at the deficiencies that the ethics and compliance program had there, and really even changing the amount of their offer because they needed to retrade the deal to have information and resources to take care of the acquisition. And, one of the ones that is kind of textbook is when Mondelez International, which used to be Kraft, did an acquisition of Cadbury in India. They didn't find out about ethics and compliance violations until about 6 to 9 months into owning the asset. So, Baker & McKenzie is one of the largest global law firms, and they're really taking a look again at how you can use ethics and compliance again to get an advantage, and the advantage would be doing M&A. And, in one of my prior incarnations, I was with a middle market investment bank here in Los Angeles called Focal Point Partners. And I think when you get the deal guys together, both the lawyers and the bankers, all they really want to do is get the transaction over the line and get paid. And there really has been a dearth of due diligence from the ethics and compliance side of the house. And hopefully this new paper by Baker & McKenzie will get people to think about that a little bit more.
Jay, the thing that really jumped out at me was that basically 20% of all companies give compliance staff substantive roles in pre-acquisition components of M&A, and that's just frankly unacceptable. If you think back to the 2012 FCPA guidance put out by the Department of Justice and Securities and Exchange Commission, they made it abundantly clear that they view your pre-acquisition work as at least as important as your post-acquisition work, and that they expect your post-acquisition work is informed by what you've done pre-acquisition. And if you have not done that work pre-acquisition, you run the high risk of missing something. And as I tell people, the big problem is if you buy a company that was engaging in bribery and corruption, and they continue to do so, it is not now them who is engaging in bribery and corruption, it is you. And that means that you're going to be liable under the FCPA. You have not bought an FCPA violation. You are violating the FCPA. And at this point, in 2018, 20% of companies utilizing compliance in the pre-acquisition phase of M&A is just almost mind-boggling, but there's got to be more compliance component, and the Department of Justice cannot, and Securities and Exchange Commission could not have made it clear in 2012, and they're continuing to make it clear today. So, Jay, our next piece came out last week, but it's so pervasive and so incredible and so great, frankly. We're closing in on the truth is stranger than fiction again. And it's an article in Bloomberg Business Week. It came out on the East, available on their online site last week, and the magazine came out today about the fall of Travis Kalanick at Uber. And the subtitle is, and this encapsulates it all, Uber's horrible year was weirder and darker than you thought. It's by Eric Newcomer and Brad Stone. And basically what they detailed was the story of a corporate meltdown in the form of Travis Kalanick, and watching him just deteriorate throughout the year. With the thing that they brought, new information they brought to the table, though, Jay, was that senior leadership at the company had complained to the board. And this was not, picking up the phone, calling somebody. This was not anonymous hotline tips. This was multiple senior leaders named, jointly signing a letter, several letters, several communications to the board of directors saying, please help us. Please help us. And the board basically doing nothing. And it's as damning on the board as it is on Kalanick, frankly. And the only thing that got the board off its duff was the blog post detailing the sexual harassment that went on at Goober by the ex-employee Susan Fowler. So really interesting read, lots in there. I think we're going to have to unpack it from the board perspective at some point. But it's as weird as the KPMG saga. So maybe we should, rename this one the Weirdness Week. I don't know. but it's literally watching someone have a year-long meltdown and be able to almost take the company down with it.
Okay, so we go from there to taking a look at another technology article. This is from Vince Walden and some of his colleagues at Ernst & Young, as well as a team at GE led by Al Rosa. And basically, they've developed a new tool which is called profit and loss of one. And it's basically a way to prevent fraud using enhanced compliance from digital twins. And what that is basically coming up with, I guess, if you had an engine and you wanted to test what would happen to it, you could build a virtual twin of that and then expose it to different conditions and test your hypothesis. So what they are trying to do here is isolate target audiences, deliver messaging that's tailored for individual roles and risk files, and assess the effectiveness of training and delivery communication. So a lot of times we've heard about situations where, we've heard about technology that if you're going into your company's travel system and you're taking a trip to Russia, that you can be messaged about your company's gift and entertainment policy. So what they've really done, and one of the things that you've been talking about for, I think, the last year or so, is just about further taking AI and integrating it into your ethics and compliance program. And the article is really interesting, and it talks about using some technology from E&Y, which is an acronym they look at called AIR. And AIR stands for Automated, Intriguing, and Relevant. And the automation seeks to drive efficiency and provide transparency and facilitate compliance for repeatable processes. The intriguing communications incorporates gamification to get people involved. Sometimes you could have a leaderboard to see who's performing better, or sometimes some type of game or puzzle to solve. And finally, the relevant, again, delivering that information in a way that is most useful to employees in the field and delivering it to them when they need it. So I think that does dovetail better with the article that we talked about with Henry. What were your thoughts on this one, Tom?
So, Jay, I thought a lot about this article. It is one of the most important articles I've read about technology, innovation, and compliance in some time. It, frankly, is stunning in the way that EY, Vince Walden and his team collaborated with the GE to come up with this profit and loss of one. They took multiple data sources, including the GE training database, TI's corruption perception index, customer information, GE CRM data, travel and entertainment employee data, and GE's third-party due diligence database, and ran it through an automated intriguing and relevant AIR communication systems, an algorithm that EY developed to be able to give each individual employee the risk tailored to what they're doing. So imagine that, Jay, and let's just use you and I as examples. I'm in Kazakhstan and you're in Nigeria, or I'm in Brazil and you're in Japan, or you're in Russia and I'm in Venezuela. Those are all different risks. I've articulated high risk areas for across the globe for each of us, but the risks are different in each one. And this profit and loss of one allows an employee to get the most cutting edge information about what the risk they are facing based upon the business situation they're in front of. And the digital twin allows testing of various types of risks, almost in a wind tunnel model. So the concept is, is pretty basic, but it's also evolutionary, if not revolutionary, in terms of delivering a coherent, consistent compliance solution to problems if they exist. And it's given to the employee, who can then either utilize GE's wide variety of internal risk management techniques, strategies, and theories, or if they have to run it up the flag post and get help, they can raise their hand and ask for help. So I found it to just be a stunning revelation and innovation, and actually talked to Vince about it based simply upon the article. So looking forward to exploring this further. Cannot give enough kudos to Vince Young and his team at EY and the GET for taking a chance on something like this. But this really shows where compliance is going, how compliance delivers not only a business value, but frankly, this is going to make the GE employee more efficient and at the end of the day more profitable. And that's what the holy grail of compliance has been for some time. We're not going to have lawyers sitting there saying no anymore, writing policies and procedures and, God forbid, codes of conduct that say thou shalt not. Now we've got a compliance saying thou shall, and here's how thou shalt do it. So I think it's pretty exciting, Jay.
Amen.
So, wow. Well, we've got some time, Jay, and I said a lot about KPMG. There is 2.5 tons of horse hockey to unpack in this, but maybe I should start with, what were your initial thoughts? Because you played in the corporate world, you played in the as mid-market capital world, you've been a salesman, you've been in the consumer world, you've been in lots of different worlds, and to have something like this happen, what were you thinking?
Well, it's like, where is anybody's reality filter? How could a senior manager and one of like a practice leader at a big four company think it would be a good idea to get all the answers that are going to be on the test? I mean, that just rings to the fact that this person does not have any ethics. Then to bring 2 or 3 other folks in, and then also to encourage dissemination of this information throughout the company. So it's bad enough that they're doing things on their own, but they're basically, writing their own death sentence by spreading it out and finally hoping that it gets to somebody who has a shred of ethics and compliance. So, I mean, it just sounds like dumb and dumber. And I was just shocked as I read Francine's article, and the deeper and deeper it went, and it appears that there's still another unnamed 5 or 6 partners, right, who are mentioned in a DOJ action. So those were my first thoughts. But why would anybody think that's a good idea?
I love that. Why would anyone think it's a good idea to get the test answers? Channeling your inner twins, I see. Dad Jay. Well, Jay, in a FCPA case, the dreaded question is where else? In this case, I think the dreaded question is going to be who else? Because this went on for 2 years. This was not a one-off. And you're correct. The DOJ listed 5 unnamed partners in the indictments. It's unclear their role, but you've got to know that others at KPMG knew about this. And what's going to be their responsibility, both civil and criminal, and then what's going to be the responsibility of KPMG going forward on this? Francine McKenna raised the question, are the audits valid? Do they companies have to go back and make restatements? If KPMG is going to steal the answers for the test and then use those answers or go back and change old tests, why would anyone trust that they've done something else? Why would you trust that they've been honest with you? So I think this is going to be a huge scandal. Like I said, Francine McKenna was born to write this story, so I'm looking forward to seeing what she comes up with. So, Jay, we've got a couple of other things that maybe we can touch on briefly. I'm in the last throes of 31 days to a more effective compliance program. As we record, I'm on day 25, so 6 more days to go. Check that out. Sponsored by Conversant this month. Also, Jonathan Marks and I are doing a next compliance masterclass on February 12 and 13 at Markham's offices in Miami. So if you'd like some information, we'd love to have you there. I know you're getting ready to participate, I believe, Jay, in a local SCCE conference. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, we're having a one-day conference down in Irvine, which is in Orange County, and it's basically it starts off at about 8:25 in the morning and goes to 4:30. And the subject matter that we're going to cover, there, as always, SCCE plans these things in advance, but they always seem to be spot on. First topic would be near and dear to our colleague Jonathan Armstrong, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, and top-line global privacy is key. Then we're going to next take a look at the state of DOJ and SEC guidance and compliance implications. Then the next thing we're going to talk about is engaging your board, break for lunch, look at high-risk markets in FCPA, and two colleagues will be leading that, Brian Michael from King & Spalding, and Tedra Foster, who is at Herbalife Nutrition. And then we'll go into the home stretch, look at immigration. That keeps popping up again and again in the news. And finally, the last session will be on why marketing and communication drives more impact than training alone. So I've done a few of these one-day events, and it's really nice to get together. You'll see more of your local folks there, and with LA being such a sprawl, I'll meet people that I would not normally see, because even though Irvine's maybe 40 or 50 miles away, depending on the lovely traffic here in California, it can be a heck of a schlep. So I'm going to go down there tonight, looking forward to the conference tomorrow, and then maybe I can put some thoughts together to have for next week to share on what was discussed. Also wanted to let people know, if you happen to be listening in from Singapore, my colleague Eric Feldman will be out there teaching a class, anti-fraud class for the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and that will be on January 29th and January 30th.
So great. Well, Jay, we're going to hold off on any more football discussions until next episode, so you don't have to give your predictions as yet. But we will note for the record that the Eagles and the New England Patriots are meeting in Super Bowl 52 at Minneapolis next week. So on that note, Jay, you want to take us home?
Sure. So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for joining us for This Week in FCPA episode 86, the We're Off to Minneapolis edition. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast. We take our ratings very seriously, and the comments that you leave. If you leave a particularly funny comment, we will read it on the air. Also, if you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can reach Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. Thank you again for listening to This Week in FCPA, and I hope you'll join us next week, where we review the week's comings and goings and tops FCPA and compliance-related stories. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.